Welcome, Gunrunner.
Now, those of you who have been following my channel for some time will be very familiar with my greatest arcade game series, where I looked at the 20 most important coin-ops released in each year from the dawn of the industry in 1975 to the time when consoles started to catch up, technologically speaking, in 1995. So that was 20 games for each year across 20 years, 2020 vision I guess you could say. After that timeline was completed, I produced 2 more bonus videos, one looking at my own top 20 arcade games and another top 20 that was voted for by you, my viewers, and the retro gaming community at large. I've linked both of these in the description if you want to watch them. I fully intended to stop right there and not do any more, but here we are once again. So why is that, I hear you ask? Well, there are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, because I've had loads of comments from people who have more recently discovered my channel on those old videos asking for more of them. And, rather specifically, numerous people have asked for a video looking at 1996. Secondly, because I'm moving house the very weekend this comes out, so I need something I can make in advance as I'm taking nearly 2 weeks off to complete my house move. The need to produce something in advance meant that I couldn't do my usual viewer voted video, and I thought that this would make a good replacement, especially as there was already demand for such a video in the first place. So what was so special about 1996 then, and what were the themes of that year? Well, fighting games were still all the rage, with new entries in several well-established franchises and the start of several new ones that would go on to be pretty important as far as the one-on-one genre goes. There were also plenty of new racing games too, a staple of arcades to this very day. But what was really interesting was the very unlikely revival of 2D shoot-em-ups in a world where everything was now in 3 dimensions. I'm not entirely sure what sparked this big comeback, but it was certainly nice to see. I also think that many of you will be more familiar with the games on this list as PlayStation or Sega Saturn titles rather than coin-operated machines. Such was the industry shift, so it'll be interesting to see your memories of them down in the comments. Now let's have a closer look at the 20 greatest arcade games of 1996 then, shall we? Now, let's address the elephant in the room then, shall we? Yes, you're right, Street Fighter EX was not only a pretty awful game, but also a game that never should have happened. The Street Fighter franchise has always been a perfect example of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and the move into 3D to compete with the likes of Virtua Fighter and Tekken was an awful decision by Capcom. Thankfully, they listened to the people and quickly forgot about this endeavour and returned to the Street Fighter style we all know and love shortly afterwards. Still, SFEX is certainly an interesting historical footnote. With the revival of scrolling shoot-em-ups in the mid-90s, Namco thought it would be the ideal time for them to revive their hugely popular Xevious franchise. But rather than just throw out another very similar follow-up, Namco decided to bring the game right up to date and transform it into 3D. Now, at first looks, this very much seems to be the original Xevious game, but built out of polygons with a new tilted perspective and those all-important power-ups. However, many people felt that these changes ruined the purity of the original game. But I can't say I agree with this. I thought it was a huge improvement. It's fair to say that the original Killer Instinct was a pretty incredible game when it was first released. Perhaps not from a gameplay perspective, but the use of jaw-dropping rendered graphics, as well as its seemingly impossible ultra combos, wowed arcade audiences everywhere. This reception made a sequel almost inevitable, and in 1996 we got more of the same with Killer Instinct 2. Once again programmed by Rare and released by Midway, the only new addition to the formula was the Super Bar, but all the original elements did get upgraded and improved too. In many ways, Racing's Battle Garega is a pretty standard vertically scrolling shoot 'em up along the lines of something like Gaiden or Aleste. But dig a little deeper and you'll find a number of pretty unique elements. Firstly, there's the power up system, as you're collecting different options to form a number of different preset attack formations. But clever players will also discover secret setups that are only triggered by collecting options in special sequences. It also has a very clever adjustable difficulty mode, which changes according to the individual player's skills. First we had Ace Combat, and then we had Ace Driver, Namco's attempt to transfer the huge success from the skies to the asphalt. Unfortunately, things never really worked out like that, and Ace Driver kinda got lost in the pack, not really standing out much in an already crowded arcade racer arena. However, Namco liked the game enough to make this massively enhanced version 2 years later, that included more cars, more tracks, and a new championship mode. It was certainly a big improvement on the original, even if it still didn't stand out from the crowd all that much. Second game in the semi-popular Ray series, Taito's Ray Storm is essentially a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up just like its predecessor Ray Force, but one that updated the visuals massively to use 3D polygon graphics with a pretty impressive tilted perspective. This gave the graphics real depth and allowed the programmers to add some really cool visual effects. In gameplay terms there were no major changes, but the new look really made it feel very different. Fun in single player mode, Ray Storm comes into a world of its own when you team up with a friend. I'm sure everyone out there is familiar with Namco's hugely popular weapons-based fighter Soul Calibur, but many seem to forget that before that game came Soul Edge, which was also known as Soul Blade on the PlayStation. At the time of its release, many people called this game Tekken with weapons, and that's a fair summary to be honest, as the game certainly feels very similar. It was the sequels that gave this series its own unique style, but the addition of lethal appendages was certainly a big draw, and also something that Namco's biggest rival cottoned onto too. Also known as Aero Fighter Special, Sonic Wings Limited is one of the few examples of a console game ported to the arcades, which was especially unusual in this era. First released as Sonic Wings Special on the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, this is a vertically scrolling shooter that combines features from Sonic Wings 1, 2 and 3 into one impressive and highly playable package. There are now 7 teams, 14 pilots and 26 fighters in this game, with each team consisting of 2 members and a choice of 2 fighters per pilot. There are also a few secrets to discover here too. Killer Instinct 2 wasn't the only Silicon Graphics developed sequel released by Midway in this year, as they also followed up the huge success of Cruis'n USA with Cruis'n World. But whereas the other game was more of the same, this one felt quite different, adding a number of new features. The game now saw you racing on different tracks around the world and introduced a hugely fun stunt feature for the first time, which was retained for all cruising games thereafter. This allowed you to perform amazing tricks including jumps and nitro boosts to dodge obstacles and gain that all important time. A lot of people don't seem to realise this, but NBA Hang Time is actually the true sequel to the NBA Jam games, and produced by the same team. The reason for the name change was that Acclaim, who did the home ports of the original NBA Jam games, actually purchased the rights to the name, and so Midway were forced to change it. So any NBA Jam games published after Tournament Edition aren't actually real NBA Jam games at all, and this is. Makes sense? But apart from the name, there are no real changes to the gameplay itself. It's still the crazy 2-on-2 big ball action that we know and love. Also known as Cougar Gaiden, Skullfang is the third and final game in the Data East shoot-em-up series, following on from Vapor Trail and Armour Force. This is a classic, vertically scrolling shoot-em-up in true arcade style, that features an equally cheesy plot to the previous titles in the series. All you need to know is that it's time to save the world once again. What makes this game especially interesting is that you have several choices of setup for your ship, pilot and power-ups. There are 4 ships that have differing capabilities, and also 4 alternatively skilled pilots to take control of them too. It's a little known fact that Sega's last Bronx was the very first 3D fighting game to utilise motion capture, inspiring a live action movie of the same name and a documentary chronicling its development. Using the same engine as Virtua Fighter 2, this one-on-one fighter is weapons based as opposed to the more familiar hand-to-hand combat style of its more famous sibling. The 8 different characters are armed with combat tools such as nunchuckers, kendo sticks, swords and even a giant wooden mallet. This helps give the game its own unique style and identity.
Last Bronx, Tokyo Bangaichi.
If I was giving an award to the most original and unique game on this list, then Namco's Prop Cycle certainly takes the prize. In a time where arcade games all seem to be following the same tried and tested formulas, Prop Cycle really stood out from the crowd. That's because this 3D flying simulator required you to furiously pedal to keep your craft in the air, whilst using the handlebars to plot its course. In the game you basically fly around a series of courses popping balloons, which is much more challenging than it sounds due to the unique controls, and a lot of fun with it. In 1996, we also got the Sonic game that absolutely nobody expected, or even knew that they wanted, in the form of Sonic the Fighters. I suppose we should have seen it coming given how popular the one-on-one fighting game was at this point. But its arrival was still pretty surprising. The game features 8 playable characters, including the likes of Tails, Amy Rose, Knuckles, and of course Sonic himself. But rather strangely, no Dr. Robotnik, who was only added in the 2012 console re-release. As you'd probably expect, the actual gameplay is very similar to that of Virtua Fighter 2. By 1996, the Gaiden franchise had already established itself as the leading vertical shoot-'em-up series, setting the bar for everything else. But Saibu Kaihatsu were not the ones to rest on their laurels, as they followed up the first 2 Gaiden games and the spin-off Viper Phase 1 with the superb Gaiden Fighters. This took all the best elements from those games and added some of its own, including random level selections, different attack craft, new power-ups, and new ways to combine them too. I absolutely loved this game back in the day, and the general arcade audience very much felt likewise. I've already featured several Sega fighting games on this list that utilise the groundbreaking Sega Model 2 board, building on the engine used in Virtua Fighter 2. But 1996 also saw the debut of an even more advanced Model 3 arcade system, and what better game for it to debut with than Virtua Fighter 3. Adding to the winning formula of the first 2 games, this added undulating landscapes, 2 new characters, and a handy dodge button. People liked what they saw, and Virtua Fighter 3 went on to be the 4th highest grossing arcade game of the year, and rightfully so. Following on from the huge success of both Daytona USA and Sega Rally, came another attempt to realistically replicate a popular motorsport with Sega Touring Car Championship. And once again the Japanese arcade giants hit the jackpot, giving audiences an unrivaled simulation of the often ignored sport that features souped up versions of everyday saloon cars. Undoubtedly the best driving game released this year, it features 4 tracks, real cars, a licensed soundtrack and realistic car setups too. An equally excellent Sega Saturn port soon followed, as well as a PC version the year after that. Dead or Alive might be nothing more than a shameless rip-off of Sega's own Virtua Fighter series, but one that was so good it spawned a whole franchise of its own. There are a few slight differences between the 2 games though. Firstly, instead of ring-outs, Dead or Alive has an electrified area around the arena that causes a nice explosion followed by bodies flying into the air if somebody lands on it. Secondly, the fighting style in Dead or Alive is more refined than in Virtua Fighter, and the characters are much more alike and evenly matched too, making it far more accessible to beginners. Remember the classic Capcom slash-em-up Strider? Of course you do, because it's rightly regarded as an all-time classic. But I bet you don't remember its unofficial sequel Osman, do you? and that's a shame because it's every bit as brilliant. Created by much of the same team, instead of a futuristic Soviet setting, Osman is set in a neon-lit, cyberpunk, Arabian-styled world, but the gameplay mechanics are very much still the same, as you flip, slide and fight the enemies. I don't think it's an exaggeration to call Osman the last truly great 2D side-scrolling arcade game. Yes, it really is that good. As far as light gun shooters go, there are a few more famous than Sega's House of the Dead. What made it particularly notable at the time was the extreme levels of gore along with the horror-based theme. It saw the cabinet carry an 18 certificate. Although I suspect that this was more of a clever publicity stunt than anything else, as there was absolutely nothing to stop kids in the arcades from watching adults play it. House of the Dead was undoubtedly the standout game of 1996, drawing huge audiences everywhere it went. I mean, who doesn't love blasting bloodthirsty zombies? And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1995. Are there any others you can think of that should have made the list? Or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts and views down in the comments. But before I go, I must thank all of my loyal patrons who continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges. Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, Mins, 8-Bit Guy, Luke MC, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.